And I think we are live. Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying Hobby Fest. It's a great event that we've been having on this weekend from James and Frankie and Kirsten Amonet on Instagram. There's been loads of really good streams so far, and I don't know if you've been watching them. I've just been catching up with Benjamin Craddock on Instagram, who's been doing a face tutorial for painting vampires. That's been really cool to watch. And I'm going to be doing a little tutorial on airbrushing. So it's going to be like an Airbrush 101 sort of type tutorial, going through the basics of what an airbrush is, how to use them, and why they are the best cheat in the whole of painting Warhammer. So before we begin, I'm Spencer. I make YouTube videos. You might have seen me on YouTube, like with some 5-minute YouTube tutorials. I'm on Instagram as Spens Painting, and also on Twitter as Spens Painting too. So you might have seen me there. I paint a lot of Warhammer. I've painted a few other models from different miniature games, but it's mainly Warhammer. Things like Sisters of Battle, Custodes, the occasional Gloomspite, that kind of thing. I started painting at the beginning of last year, the beginning of 2020. I was looking for a new hobby and decided to just pick up Warhammer, really, get into it, and I got into it in a big way. A lot of money later, it was really good fun. It's been one of the most rewarding hobbies that I've tried. I have tried a fair few hobbies, and yeah, I absolutely love it, which is why I now want to share with the rest of you the joys that it can bring. And I think airbrushing is one of the skills and pieces of equipment that really does make it a lot more enjoyable. So let's get into it. I'm just going to move the camera around. So just bear me 2 seconds and you should be able to see. Sorry about this. I'm just I had some technical issues earlier this week with my camera. So I'm just going to move it around a bit just to make sure you can actually see what's going on. Which obviously at the moment you can't. Right, here we go. This is not going well. Okay, right, let's move this across a bit. Try and get everything in focus. Pick up these effects. Okay. So these are my airbrushes. Now, if you've watched any tutorials on painting online, you'll have seen airbrushes before. Yeah, so these are airbrushes. There's two sort of main components to an airbrush that make it actually work. So you have a needle, which is inside this body here, and then you have a nozzle here, which lets air come in and come out the end. What I'm going to do is I'll take this apart so you can see all the components. This is a cheap Chinese airbrush, and this is a more expensive airbrush. So this is a Harden Steinbeck Evolution CR Plus, and this one is a Fengda FE 130, which actually just came with my compressor. So this part here is the needle, and that's probably the most important thing with an airbrush. It goes into the body of the airbrush here. Try and get it there. Let me just make sure we get that in there without bending it too much. And the way an airbrush actually works, the needle goes through here and it is stopped in a nozzle at the end here. You can see it just poking out there. This needle, the end is slightly bent, but it works fine still. And what happens is we put paint in the hopper at the top here, which is then gravity fed into a well here, which is blocked by this needle coming out the end. Then when we connect our airbrush and our compressor, to the bottom here by the hose, we have a trigger here that lets air flow out of the end of the nozzle, and as it travels out the end, if we pull back the needle, that'll let paint be brought out by the air. There is a fancy physics term for why it works, but yeah, that's generally how it works. So let's put this back together. When you get an airbrush, obviously this on its own isn't going to do anything. So you need a compressor, which is what I've got under the desk. And the compressor comes with a hose like this. You just attach that to the bottom of the airbrush, like so. This one's got a bit of a leak. There we go. Yeah, so you just attach it to the bottom here. The compressor, you set the air pressure that you want on the compressor. So at the moment I've got it set to 10 psi. And the way an airbrush works, this type of airbrush anyway, it's called a double action airbrush. So the trigger here, you can move it backwards and forwards, and that's attached to the needle. So as you move it backwards and forwards, the needle will travel forwards and backwards, obviously pulling it further or closer to the nozzle at the end. And the more you pull back, obviously that's going to pull further back, let more paint flow into the nozzle and be pulled out. And then when you press it up and down, that lets air travel out of the hose and out the end. So you can press it down a little bit and like a little bit out, or more and like more out, and obviously pull it backwards and forwards. So you've got quite a lot of control on both the air pressure and the amount of paint that you let out. So you have quite a variable amount of control there. If you can get really used to really fine movements with it and just like tiny bits of air out at a time, you can get some really fine effects. Obviously, as I said, I've got two different airbrushes here. One of them is a lot more expensive than the other. So this cheap Chinese airbrush, that came with my compressor, and it cost, I think at the time it cost about £100 for the compressor and this airbrush and the hose, basically a whole kit to get started. Now, I think it's gone up in price since I bought it, but you can still get them for, I think it's about £130, something like that now. That is less than the price of the Harden Steinbach airbrush on its own, so it is quite a big jump in price. So if you just want to get into it, one of these airbrushes is fine, and I've used this airbrush for a lot of things. I only upgraded my airbrush at Christmas to the Evolution, and I still use the Chinese airbrush quite a lot for just generally sort of more messy jobs like priming, that kind of thing, more large scale jobs, and I use the Evolution for finer details. I've forgotten where we were going with this, but let's have a play around with some paints now. So with airbrushing, you can just use normal paints, and it's quite a it's a bit of a myth really that you have to really thin down paints to be using an airbrush. You can just put a paint straight through the airbrush and it will work. The only problem with doing that is that it will clog the airbrush quite quickly. Obviously, inside the airbrush, where you put the paint in here, it's going to sit inside this well until it's used and comes out the end. If the paint's too thick, it will start drying and clog the inside here, which obviously you don't want. So what you use is Airbrushed Thinners, and Airbrushed Thinners, they're just mix them with the paint until they're the right consistency for what you need, and then they just help the airbrush to not dry as quickly and to be more fluid so that it's not going to clog up your airbrush as much. You can also buy paints which are pre-mixed from a few different companies for airbrushing, so you can use them straight out of the bottle. They're just a little bit thinner than the other paints. A lot of the time, I still thin these down a little bit. Just put like a little like maybe half a drop of thinner in there with the airbrush paints, just because it gives me a little bit more control of what I want to do. Another thing that you can use in the airbrush are inks, which I've only really started using recently, and I love them. They're a new sort of addition to my hobby toolkit, and yeah, I've had some really good effects with it. The best way I can describe inks, they're really intense, but they're also really transparent, which sounds odd because obviously you would think if something's really intense, it'd go on, make a really solid coat, but it's not. I have a model here that I can show you, which might sort of explain it better. So this is a Sister of Battle that I painted, and you can see the green sort of atmospheric effect, and that's all this It's a long name. Let's just call it green blue shade. We'll miss out the rest of the name. And you can see that even though it's a really strong colour, if I bring it close to the camera, that might make it a bit clearer. Even though it's a really strong colour, let's move the light in a bit more there as well. It doesn't completely completely get rid of the colour underneath. It lets some of it show through. So you can see, like on the red, obviously, where it shades it there down to like a purple almost, and across the metallics, it just gives it that nice effect. So yeah, inks are probably one of the best things that I've found recently that you can use through an airbrush, but you certainly don't need to. Similar to inks, you can actually use contrast paints from Games Workshop through an airbrush, and they go really well. Most of the time they're a little bit thicker than an ink. Inks are very runny. Contrast paints, they are a little bit thicker, but they go through the airbrush really, really well, and they are quite intense, again, a bit like an ink. But yeah, they're really nice to use through an airbrush. And the last paint which I would suggest using through an airbrush for a slightly different effect are the shade paints. These, obviously, they're mega thin, really, really fluid. So you have to be careful when using them because you get what's called spider webbing, which we'll go into in a little bit. But with these, if you're really careful, you use a low pressure and you're really careful with your trigger, you can get some really nice slow build up of colours. The best way I've sort of used these are, I don't have it at hand, but there's a maggotkin that I painted, and the belly of it, I used different shades to build up tones across the belly. So I used like Drucci Violet for like a sort of like inflamed purple colour, Carabao Crimson, again, similar sort of thing. And they work really nicely, but you do have to take your time with them and not get that spider webbing effect, and slowly build up the colours. And they come out really nice and matte, which is good. So yeah, those are the sort of main sort of types of paint I would recommend using. You can use things like enamel washes and oil paints as well through an airbrush, but those are pretty much a completely different kettle of fish. So I'm not going to talk about those too much. That's sort of more an advanced thing. And this, I just want to sort of go over the basics of how you use an airbrush and what the benefits are of an airbrush in this tutorial. So let's actually spray some paints. Before we do that though, let's talk about safety. It's a bit boring, but when you're airbrushing, you should wear one of these. Respirator. Most paints that nowadays, they are safe to use. They don't have, especially model paints anyway, they don't have like nasty different pigments in there that can cause you harm or toxic. But they are still going to create airborne particles, which they're going to go into your lungs, which is probably not best really. So for the sake of just sticking on a mask, bit of safety for long-term health, why not? It's probably for the best. And also, let's just wear some gloves, because no one wants to have paint all over their hands. Yeah, it might look cool if you've got a bit of paint your thumb, but no one wants to really have painted up hands where you sprayed all over them. So let's get a glove on there. I am not going to be wearing a mask for this tutorial, because I can't. If I wore a mask, you wouldn't be able to hear me speaking. So yeah, that wouldn't be ideal. I should check where that leak was coming from, because it sounded like it could have been from the seal there on this quick release. Let's just double check on that again. Ah yeah, there we go. Good. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do firstly is, whenever I start airbrushing, this is just sort of something I do. I put through a little bit of thinner, just to make sure everything's nice and fluid inside, and just spray that there. Okay, cool. Obviously, you're not going to be able to see the thinner coming through. That's just it's just a clear liquid. So let's check that. There we go. Okay, cool. So first paint I'm going to use is Citadel Corvus Black, and I use these little metal trays to mix my paints in before I use them, and an old brush. So let's get this. Chorus black's a really nice color, even though it's called black, but it's not really black. It's like a really dark bluey grey. So let's get some of that in there. We'll add a little bit of thinner. Mix that up. You've probably seen, well, countless different YouTube tutorials on doing this. Yeah, there's loads of really good painters out there that do it. And let's get that into the top. So this is what's called a gravity fed airbrush. There are like a few different types of airbrush as well. You can get ones where you have like a tank underneath which is fed up into it, but a gravity fed one is probably the best for what we use because it doesn't use much paint, and they're simple to clean as well. So let's put that in there. Yep. Right, so I've got my PSI set to, let's set that to 10, and let's see what it comes out like. There you go, you can see it's coming out fine. So yeah, that's what sort of generally it comes out like that. And that's just pressing down a little bit and pulling it back a tiny bit. I'm getting a little bit of speckle in there, but that's okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how you can control it. Oh, so I've just got a question. So from ETP Miniatures, what do you think about mixing directly in the pot? Because that's the way I was doing it. That's fine. The reason I don't like doing that is because if I'm mixing inside the pot, it's hard for me to see the exact color that I'm working with. If you're using it straight from, like a paint straight from the pot that you're just going to use that color, that's okay. But you do have to make sure you put in the thinner first, rather than putting in the paint, because obviously the first paint you put in, that's going to feed straight down into the well, and obviously when that's in there, if that's the first paint you put in and then you put the thinner on top, you can have thick paint stuck in there, and if you then start blowing at like a low PSI, that's going to clog up, or eventually clog up anyway. It's going to dry on your needle or in the nozzle, and eventually cause problems. So just for using one of these little metal trays, it just saves a little bit of hassle with doing that. And it obviously, so it took me 2 seconds to do it in there, so it's not too much of an issue. You can do it in the pot; it's not a problem. It just means you might have to clean your airbrush out a bit more. They're pretty resilient tools as well, so cleaning's not normally an issue. But let's see how fine we can get this. So let's write my name. Okay, cool. So we can get that pretty thin just from doing that. This is probably like the ideal sort of consistency I would find for painting most things on a model. You can see if we go too hard with the pressure, we get this spider web in, and this will happen either if you pull back on the trigger too quickly, or if the pressure is too high. So let's just ramp the pressure up to let's go to 30. So yeah, that happens again. Take that down to 10. So you get this spider webbing effect. The thinner the paint, the easier you'll get this effect, and obviously the more controlled you have to be on the trigger to make sure you don't get it. Obviously you can drop the PSI down to, well, as low as you want really, and that'll avoid it as well. Especially when you're using something like one of the shade paints, you have to really drop it down for those, because those are mega thin, as I said. You don't want to be using these at a high PSI, otherwise they're going to just go everywhere. Hello, Goldfinch minis. So yeah, that's why you get spiderweb in. Now, if you drop the pressure all the way down, I don't know I think the paint might be too thin to show you this, but so if you've got the pressure too low, you get this speckling effect. Let's do it over here. So instead of it being a nice constant stream, you just get speckles, and the reason for that is as the air comes through, if the pressure is not high enough, instead of it being like atomizing or vaporize, not, I don't know what the right word is really, but instead of it coming out as a nice constant stream of fluid paint, it dries as it comes out, and it becomes like a speckle like this, which you can actually use as effect quite well. I've done some custodies where I've made like a nice starry night like effect on their power blade, and you can use that to you can actually use that effect if you want to. And it's same with the spider webbing. Really, there's probably something out there that you could work with, to put that effect to use, but you don't really want it for the majority of airbrushing. So that's what happens if the pressure's too low, or that can happen if the paint's too thick as well. So let's put the pressure back up to 10. And yeah, so if you're too far away, you get like you can get like a really loose effect. If you're really close, obviously you get that spider webbing effect as well. So the distance makes a difference as well as the pressure and the control on the trigger. So there's a few different things at work really when you're airbrushing. The best thing you can possibly do is just practice different things. I don't really recommend doing it on a piece of paper. The reason for that is it's not a miniature. It's not a 3D thing. It's just 2D. Me writing my name on here is not the same as creating a nice blend on a mini. It's not going to be. But, it's a good way of just testing out if a paint's too thick or thin, or, what you want to do. Once we've used our paint, obviously we need to clear it out. And that's where something like one of these pots comes in useful. So I don't want to turn it on the side because it has got paint in it, but basically this is just a pot underneath. It's got a little holder here for the airbrush, slots in there, and this is just an entry hole. It goes in. It's got like a piece of plastic in the middle there, and a vent here to let gases escape. And all we do is we can empty the airbrush into this pot just by spraying through, and that will just get rid of all the paint. So you can see there. So you can see the hoppers are just emptying out. There we go. And then what I normally do is get some cleaner, just airbrush cleaner. A few different brands do this, but I just use the Vallejo one just because it's easy to get on Amazon. Use our rubbishy old brush, just give that a swill around inside. Just make sure there's no stuck on paint in the bottom. And spray that away again. And that's it. We're good to move on to our next colour. So I got a few questions on Instagram about different things to do with airbrushing. So I was going to go through a few of those now, just to sort of cover the questions that people have got really. So one question I got is, what is a good beginner's airbrush? And I think the best thing you can possibly do is buy one of the kits which has the compressor and one of the cheap Chinese airbrushes. The cheap Chinese airbrushes, they get a bad rep for breaking a lot, but I mean, you get what you pay for, but they will work fine. So if you're just learning and just beginning, the cheap Chinese airbrush, if you break something, you can buy a replacement on eBay or on Amazon. Sorry, I've got Amsterdam inks on my desk, which I'm going to show you in a bit. Those are pretty good inks. Yeah, so if you can buy replacement parts on Amazon for really cheap, like I broke a needle and a nozzle in this one, and I got replacements for like £3, I think, something like that. And when you buy it with the kit with the compressor's fine. Quietus just said in the chat, like pretty good compressor. Yeah, the compressor that it comes with is great. Like, it's got a variable PSI, which is perfect. It comes with a hose. It's got a moisture trap, which is good because you don't want moisture in your line. Obviously, that would affect the paint. And yeah, it's a great compressor. The compressor will probably last forever. And even if this airbrush does break, it doesn't matter. So I think these are really good for beginners. The next question, which sort of this leads on to, is like the price range of them, or how much they are. You can get cheap USB airbrushes where instead of having the hose nozzle, it's got like a miniature compressor, which it just looks like a can on the bottom, and it just plugs into a USB and works for you. I haven't tried one of those personally, so I don't know how good they are. I think for if you were just doing things like base coating and priming things, those would be fine. Um, maybe not for long term use, or I don't know like how long they would last for, but that's probably on the cheaper end of things. This kit that comes with this airbrush and the compressor and the hose, it comes with some cheap paints as well, but I've not even tried those, and a little cleaning kit. Um, I think we've had a drop out there. Oh, and we're back. Okay, cool. So, um, am I back? No. Okay, we are back. Sorry about that. Um, so yeah, as I was saying, the the kit that comes, I can't remember. I don't know where I was when it disconnected, but uh, as I was saying, this kit that comes with this airbrush and the compressor at the moment on Amazon, I think it's about £130, which is pretty good for you know something that is going to last you a long time and really speed up your painting. If you're serious about painting and getting better at painting, I think even just for the time saving and versatility of using an airbrush, it's well worth it. Um, on from that, looking at a quality airbrush, there's a few different brands that you could look at. As I said, I've got a H&S Evolution CR Plus, which is this one here, and this is a great airbrush. It is more pricey. This one, I got the two-in-one version, so it comes with two different needles. So that's something I haven't talked about yet, but I'll come on to that in a second. So it comes with two different needles. It's really, really good quality. The trigger on it is much better quality than the cheap Chinese one. It's much nicer to use. Uh, outside of H&S, you've got another company called Iwata. Yeah, someone in the chat has just beat me to that. And they've got a great range too. There are a few other brands as well which you could look at. I think Badger's one, but H&S and Iwata, those are the two main sort of brands, and they've got airbrushes in different ranges. You know, going from really cheap up to quite expensive. Well, very very expensive. But the ones you're looking for on any of them are the Quality Fed double action airbrushes. Um, you don't need to spend that much money on one. The main thing you get from spending that much money, which was another question I got, is the build quality and how nice they are to use. So even just feeling the difference between the two, you can tell that this is a lot sturdier. The construction's better. The O rings are much better. Um, it's just nicer. It's hard, which is hard to quantify when you know the price difference is so big, but it just is that it is just the way they are. The big thing for me that I much prefer is just the feel of the trigger on the Evolution. I feel a lot more controlled with it. I feel like I can, you know, modulate how much paint I'm using a lot easier. Um, that's to me is the big draw of having the nicer airbrush, the trigger action. The Chinese one, that still does have like an okay trigger action, but it's a lot. Um, the big thing for me on the Chinese one that's I dislike is the actual control of air. It's not as smooth as on the Evolution. The Evolution, I've got way more control of just you know controlling the up and down and the backwards and forwards, and that gives me that finer control to be able to do you know little writing or you know shading in a really small area. Whereas on the Chinese one, it's a lot mm, just just not as smooth really. Yeah, that's the main difference between a cheap one and a more expensive one for me anyway. Um, someone said, which it's a bit of a weird question, well, a bit of a hard question to answer. But someone said, I'm 12 weeks into the hobby and wonder if you recommend it. It's a hard one to recommend on based on how much time you've been into the hobby, because I think they're worth it to everyone in the hobby. Um, but having said that, obviously they're not a cheap tool, and not everyone wants to spend so much money on painting. So a lot of people in the hobby are more into it for the gaming and that side of things, and it's all going to depend on your personal budget, really, I suppose. If you really want to get the most out of painting and speed things up a lot, uh, create tabletop ready models in a fraction of the time that it takes using a brush, then yeah, an airbrush is going to be a massive help to you. If you're not really bothered about that, you're not bothered about spending a lot of time painting, you maybe just want to prime up a few minis and either brush paint them or just some quick dry brushing and things like that, then maybe it's not for you. It all depends on what you want to spend and how much you want to spend them on it. Um, Someone in the chat, Logical Animal, has said that they bought a cheaper one from Facebook to play with the USB charge compressor. How have you found that, Logical Animal? It'd be interesting to know, or if you haven't tried it yet. It would be interesting to know how you find that. And someone else in the chat has just put about spray primer. Um, yeah, so I kind of think of an airbrush as it's like a spray, but you have way more control of the pressure that it puts out, way more control of the colour that it puts out, because obviously you can change to whatever colour you want and use different types of paints, and it gives you a lot more versatility than spray cans. And spray cans aren't really cheap either. They're like a good quality spray can is like at least 12 quid here in the UK usually, I think. Not that I've bought one for a long time because I haven't needed to, but yeah, I it's hard to say what's worth something for somebody else, but I really recommend them for anyone who's into the painting side of the hobby anyway. What other questions? Yeah, do I use a respirator when I airbrush? Yes, I do. I like, especially at the moment, everyone's used to wearing masks for going outside anyway. So wearing a mask when you're inside doing airbrushing, it's not really that much of an issue, really. Someone asked, why does my airbrush spit from time to time, and how to fix it? So there's two things that it could be. So if you're spitting, um, it could be that you are either too far away from where your airbrush is and the model is, which what happens then is as you spray out, obviously the paint travels through the air and it starts to dry as it approaches the model. So when it hits the model, instead of moving onto it as like a liquid paint, it starts peppering it as individual parts. Another thing it could be is that your pressure's too low. If your pressure's too low, you'll get that as well because it can't send the paint out in a proper stream. Also, it could be that sometimes when you're airbrushing, on the end of the nozzle, on the end of the needle, you can get dried paint, and if you do that, it can dry in a certain way so that you get wet paint sitting on that dried part, and then as you spray, so you'll spray, paint will come out and go out as normal, and then you'll have a little bit of wet paint sitting on the needle end of the needle. As you spray again, that wet paint just gets like just flicks off from the by the air, and instead of it going as like a proper stream as it normally would, it it dashes onto the model. Um, so yeah, that's probably why. Those are the main reasons. So just tried a few different things there to not get that to happen. Um, how can you be so precise? So as I said, to get precision, really, finger control is the main thing. Um, with a good airbrush, it's a lot easier because the trigger is so much smoother. With a cheap airbrush, you can still be precise. It's just a little bit more tricky because the the trigger action isn't as smooth, and you get bumps where you get where the trigger is pressing down the valve inside. So it's just yeah, not as smooth. You can still do it. After trigger control, the main thing is to make sure your paint is at the right consistency for what you want it to do. which we sort of talked about. You don't want it to be too thin or your pressure to be too high so that you don't get spider webbing. And again, obviously you don't want it to be too thick or your pressure too low to get speckling. You don't want either of those. And yeah, practice is the other thing as well. I think a lot of people think when you get an airbrush, you just instantly can blend and do amazing things. It does take a bit of practice. It is a lot easier than, well, I say a lot easier. I find it a lot easier to blend and to create gradients with an airbrush than I do with a standard brush. A lot quicker as well. That's the main thing. I can create a blend with an airbrush from one color to another color in seconds or minutes maybe, whereas if I was to glaze that or to wet blend, it would take a lot longer. Yeah, that is a good point as well. So Strife has said that on more expensive models, you can restrict the amount of trigger movement. So on cheap ones, you can't do it, but on more expensive airbrushes, you can limit. So I have to sort of open the airbrush up to explain this a bit better. So this part here, this is the needle. This part is where the needle attaches into the airbrush and is held in place by this screw here. And this chuck is called a needle chuck. Is then pushed forward and back by the trigger, as you can see there. So on more expensive models, you can have a limiter. I don't actually have it on this one, which obviously it's an expensive airbrush, but it doesn't have it. And it will basically stop the needle chuck from travelling back past a certain amount. So it helps you to just not go overboard, really. I suppose it's just like an extra safety thing, just in case you go a little bit trigger happy, and yeah, that helps to stop that. What other questions have we got? Cheating. It is cheating, 100%, because it's just so much better. Anything that's as good as at making models look good as an airbrush it's just cheating. There's no two ways about it. But we were talking about blending, and I just want to show you how quick it can be to blend two different colours with an airbrush. So here I've got a Scorpina green and Squid pink from Vallejo Game Hair, and I'm going to make a green to pink gradient in a couple of minutes using this airbrush. So we're going to start with our green. Yes, Strife, that was your question. Why do we cheat? Because it's fun and it's easy and it looks good. So let's get our grey out. So here we go. Green. I'm just going to put this on really thick so it covers the white. Okay, cool. So there we go. We've got our green. Let's get our cleaner. Yeah, the Game Air range is really, really good. And the Model Air range, both from Vallejo. They make some really good paints. I've not really tried much of the Citadel Air range yet. I have tried one or two, and they're nice, but I haven't tried enough to be able to really comment on how good they are. So put that to one side. Oops. Clean out the airbrush. See green, just leave him. Cool. I might put a little bit more thinner through there, cleaner through there. That was thinner. Oops. Picked up the wrong bottle. Doesn't matter. There we go. That's clean. So that shows you just how quickly it is to, change from one colour to another. Now I've got a Squid pink. A few drops in there. Okay, so let's just test that out. There we go. Nice. So, pink. There we go. Just blend into it. That's all it takes, really. What I should probably do is blend the green a bit more there. So maybe we could do it in this bit here. I was going to go back into it. Probably not the best example, but anyway, you know, that shows you how quickly you can blend between different colours. It's not really a great blend, but yeah, it'll do for the example. Yeah, and it shows just how quickly it is to change between different colours as well. So it's literally a case of get your thinner, put it in there, get your brush, swizzle around. Spray it into our cleaning pot. Yeah, so ETP mentions just asked, is there any need to thin it down any further? So yeah, I do thin down some of the Game Air paints further, because not all of them are. They're designed to be ready from the bottle, but sometimes they are just still a little bit thick, or maybe you just want them to be a little bit thinner. I think one thing that like misconception that people have with airbrushing and airbrush paints is that there's a right consistency, and there really isn't. There's when you're working with airbrushes, there's different consistencies for different things that you want to do. So, for example, if you're working with very thin translucent layers, you can create like nice overlapping effects, which you know that you want the paint to be really thin. So using one of the Vallejo Game Air out of the bottle isn't going to really be ideal. You'd want to thin that down more. And if you're base coating, you might want a thicker paint because obviously you want a nice solid coat and you want it quickly. You don't want to have to wait around for it to to create a solid colour. So one thing I did want to do, I've got this mini, a good thinner. I just use Vallejo Airbrush Thinner. There are a few other ones out there, but the main reason I use this one is just because I can buy it on Amazon for really cheap. Well, not really cheap, but I can get it quickly on Amazon for next day. Yeah, that's the main reason I buy this one, and it works fine. Nothing special. Does what it says on the tin, really. Thins paint. So that's that. One thing I want to do is I want to play around with this this night horn. There's another 15 minutes left, so yeah, I'm just going to have to play around with this, and we'll see what we can do. Maybe we'll do a gradient from like red, maybe up to white. Let me pick out some of the individual colours on it, something like that. Yeah, let's give that a go. So, if we're going to do a gradient from red underneath up to white, we've already got like a zenithal on it, so I might just get some red ink. Yeah, we're going to use. Um, no, let's do something different. Let's do purple. Purple. Oh, I don't know. No, let's do this. I've been wanting to use this color. Um, James, we've been through this before. Airbrushing is 100% cheating, and it's 100% worth it. I am going to use some of this. This is Vivid Lime Green from Liquitex, and I've been wanting to use this for ages. It's such a bright colour. So what I'm going to do, let's give it a coat from above like this. This is just an old Nighthorn that I've had primed up for ages. If you don't know, MJ, uh, well, James, MJG Paints, who's in the chat, he is one of the organisers of Hobbyfest. He's an alright guy. He loves cheating. If you go to his Instagram, you'll see a lot of cheating on there. Yeah, no, seriously though, James is a really great guy. You should head over to his Instagram and follow him there. He posts great memes daily. So yeah, that was the the vivid lime green. Let's thin. Let's get rid of that, and we'll use the green blue shade, and we're going to spray that from underneath and see what happens. Hopefully, it should create like a nice overlapping effect with some shadows underneath. Yeah, I'm not really that used to doing live streams, to be honest. Usually, my bag is doing YouTube tutorials, so it's a bit different doing this. And I am currently going through a bit of a move, so I'm not in my usual hobby space either. So it's been there we go. That's a bit. So you can see there the speckling. This is a perfect example. This is because our pressure is too high. So sorry, too low, and that's because the airbrush compressor has been off. Right, here we go. There we go. That's a bit better. Pressure's getting up now. A milk cocktail. That sounds. Yeah, there is a lot to taking Goldfinch. What I'm going to do, I have been recording this, so I'm going to edit it afterwards and put it up on either on Instagram or on probably Instagram and YouTube as well, so you can see, uh, so you can go back and watch it and pick up any things that you missed out on or didn't hear the first time. Right, so yeah, this is our green blue shade, and let's just spray it from underneath and see what happens. Interesting. It's creating a pretty cool effect. It's looking underneath there. Ooh, that's a nice little effect. And that's just from using two inks over a zenithal highlight. So one thing I haven't talked about is zenithal highlighting, which is something which is really good in the airbrush. Um, what you can do with an airbrush, you can use it. You can do it with spray cans as well, but it's a little bit better with airbrush because you can focus more on certain areas. Basically, you prime the mini in black, and then use white or grey to spray from above, and create like natural highlights from where light would fall down onto the model. So, say for example, we're looking at this model here. I've got. Um, if we looked at it, if you imagine the dark green is black and the light green is white, um, you would have it so that you get these natural highlights from where the light hits the top and comes down, and that's just literally from priming in black and then spraying directly above in white, which is a really good way to get like a nice natural sort of effect of where the lights would fall. Um, and you can do it a bit easier with an airbrush because with an airbrush you can focus on certain areas. Like you can't do that with a spray can. A spray can it's just a blast all over and that's it. But with an airbrush you can. It works out quite nice. So yeah, that was just 2 seconds using two different inks over a zenithal highlight. Let's just hit that axe there a little bit. Yeah, cool. Quite like that. That's a really cool little scheme. How fine detail can you go with an airbrush? So let's look at this guy's face, and what colour should we paint his face? Give me a colour, and we'll see what we can do. What colour should we do? I think maybe purple. Purple might look quite good in his face there. Yeah, let's do purple. Okay. For this, I'm going to use. Let's see what we've got here. Hex Lichen, that's quite dark purple. Alien purple. So this is Vallejo Game Hat Alien purple. So yeah, so needle size. I said I was going to talk about needle size. Thanks for reminding me. So this is a 0.2 needle. I've also got a 0.4 needle. So what that means is the bigger the needle, the more paint it will let out as you pull it back, obviously from the nozzle. So a 0.2 is great for any sort of fine detail work. A 0.2, to be fair, you can use on anything really. A 0.4 you'd probably want to use for things that are a little bit bigger, maybe doing terrain or doing tanks, that kind of thing. I'm not actually sure what the biggest needle size you can get is, but I'd imagine it's pretty big. I don't know. What is the biggest needle size, Strife? You would probably know. Or James. James might know as well. Mix this up. Purple colour. Ooh. No. Shut down a little bit. So now we're working probably like 5 psi, something like that. Right. So let's see. Let's see what we can do. Flame focus. Yes. Right. We got it. Maybe there's a little bit of overlap there. I don't really think the purple actually looks that good. But so we've ruined the mini, but we have painted his face in purple. So there's that. Yeah, that's not bad, I suppose. Oh well. Um, Never mind, eh? At least we've got the details in there. So yeah, you can paint really fine things with an airbrush, and that's like I'm not that great at fine detail. I would say I'm more better at creating sort of like atmospheres with the airbrush. So for like doing, I think I showed it you before, the Sisters of Battle. That is mostly with an airbrush. Like most of the effect on this model comes from using an airbrush. So I use some Vallejo metal color airbrush paints, and they are amazing through an airbrush. And then I use the same dark green color that we used ink that we used before. This one, and I spray from above, beneath, up into the model and pick out some areas. So it just hits all the bottom edges as it goes up, and that creates this atmosphere effect. Yeah, that's that's what I enjoy using an airbrush for most, rather than fine detail work like ruining this night one's face. Never mind. At least we see we can do fine detail with it. Um, you can the main thing with an airbrush is that it's quick and it's easy to cover a large area in a short amount of time. Um, they aren't cheap, but they're probably not as expensive as most people think. Like quite a lot of people are happy to drop, like 150 quid on, well, not 150. What was it? How much was Curse City? 125 quid. Quite a lot of people are happy to buy Curse City, but then they turn their nose up at spending a little bit of money on an airbrush. So obviously different priorities, but I don't think that you can call them extortionate really for how much they are. Um, yeah, I think the main thing to sort of think about with an airbrush is the benefit that you get from the time saving of how quickly you can do things with them, how nicely they can just make a nice an effect like in really quick. Like if you just wanted to do a whole army of Nighthorn like this, I mean, what that took me like wow, hardly any time at all to make that effect. You could do a whole army in like half a day. uh, yeah, it's it's so quick to use an airbrush. They're fairly easy to use as well, and I think that's the reason why they are the best cheat in Warhammer. Really, except for don't use purple on your Nighthorn's face. It doesn't look very good. Oh well, never mind. Um, so yeah, is there any other questions that you've got for me on airbrushing at all, on or hobbying in general, or what I do, things like that? I'd love to know. Have you been enjoying Hobby Fest? I've watched a few really good streams. There's one last night from a lady whose Instagram tag is called Black Labyrinth, and she does like taxidermy on bugs and makes gothic art out of them. That was really cool. That was something really interesting. You know, it's something I've not really ever looked into the how of it before, but it was really cool to see. Yeah, it was really good. I'm definitely going to be buying something from her at some point. And if you haven't checked her out on her Etsy shop, it's really good. Um, so why does it take 3 hours to clean my airbrush? So um, could be a few things. If you're using paints that are too thick, as I said, they'll dry up and clog inside the airbrush, um, which obviously you don't want. So maybe try thinning them a little bit better and practicing with the control when they're thinner or dropping the pressure. Um, Also practice. Like I know it sounds daft, but practicing cleaning your airbrush, like by airbrushing more, will help you to get quicker at it. And yeah, obviously that all helps. Obviously, what I've been doing between each one is just rinsing some cleaner through and giving it a swizzle out with a brush. But after each session, I'll then go in and clean the needle off, just give it a wipe down, use like a cotton bud, a Q-tip to clean out any pieces that might have some paint stuck in there. And if you do it consistently and often, then it doesn't take too much time. It's one of those things where almost like prevention is the best cure, because you know you're not going to be clogging up your airbrush all the time. Um, yeah, exactly that. Um, yeah, there's been some really good hobby streams. Up next, I believe on Twitch, yeah, is Poison Ivy Painting doing a wet blending tutorial. So I'd really recommend going over and checking that out. I'm going to be doing that because wet blending is something I just do not do. If I'm going to blend anything, it is going to be with glazing or an airbrush. So yeah, I could definitely do with learning that skill. Um, yeah, there's so many more streams for the rest of the day. There's also the I think it's the competition, the painting competitions coming up. The prizes for that, or the giveaway, the awards for that. So go have a look at those. Um, no, no problem at all. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you found something useful. And if you have got any questions, just let me know. You know, you can either contact me on Instagram or on Twitter. Not really on Twitch very much. I'm at Spence Painting. Yeah, just let me know. I'm always happy to help where I can. I've got some YouTube tutorials for different bits and pieces as well. And as I said, I have been recording this, so when when it's all done, I will edit it out. You know, clear anything up and put it up onto Instagram and onto YouTube as well. So you can always go back and probably I'll probably go back and cringe at all the things that I said wrong live that I don't normally, I'm normally able to edit out on YouTube. But yeah, thanks for stopping by. Enjoy the rest of Hobby Fest. It's a really great event. Thank you to James and Frankie and Chaos Demonet for organising it. Yeah, enjoy your hobbying. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Take care and see you later. Bye.